hello there, Little Masters, and welcome back to the Prancing Pony Podcast, where, well, we've got a first for you here today in the Common Room. Today, for the first time, we are welcoming one of the greats in the world of visual arts.
And we want to give him a chance to say hello in just a moment. But first, I'm Shawn Marchese, the real-life Lord of the Mark, and I'm here with the man of the West, who I'm told knows just enough to know you use a paintbrush with the bristles pointing down, Alan Sisto.
Well, that is the sum total of my artistic knowledge, Shawn. Thanks for summing it up so generously.
That's what I'm here for.
Well, folks, today we are welcoming Greg Hildebrandt to the podcast, an iconic artist whose work has been synonymous with fantasy and sci-fi art since the 70s. He was responsible for illustrating Ballantine Books' official J.R.R. Tolkien Calendars for the years 1976 through 1978 as half of the twin brother artistic duo, the Brothers Hildebrandt.
And in addition to helping a generation of young fans visualize Tolkien's world, he has, both with his brother and solo, created art and illustrations for many of your favorite fantasy and science fiction worlds: Terry Brooks' Shannara series, the Magic the Gathering card game, Marvel Comics, and many others, including one of my personal favorites, Star Wars.
He even co-created an illustrated fantasy novel of his own, 1979's Ursharak. And he was the 2010 winner of the Chesley Award for Lifetime Artistic Achievement, presented by the Association of Science Fiction and Fantasy Artists.
Now he's the co-owner of the Spiderweb Art Gallery in New Jersey, showcasing art and collectibles from artists working in fantasy, science fiction, comics, and more. We are thrilled to have him on the podcast today, and I don't want to delay introducing him any longer. So, Greg Hildebrandt, let me be the first to say, welcome to the Prancing Pony Podcast.
It's great to be here. Happy to be here.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us. I want to start by getting to know a little bit of your history as an artist. You and your twin brother Tim started painting professionally together as the Brothers Hildebrandt back in 1959, but I'm sure the two of you were collaborating even earlier in childhood. How and when did the two of you first start joining forces artistically?
Well, I mean, being twins, we were in the womb together, so I suppose it started there. Because right. I never remember not working with Tim from a very, very early age. I mean, we just sort of like operated as a single unit.
Yeah.
We did our own thing too, separately, from each other.
Of course.
It was just always this collaborative, we talked like Huey, Dewey, and Louie. We'd finish each other's sentences, which kind of like a lot of people got a bang out of that, but we just thought it was perfectly normal,
Yeah.
But it was very early. I mean, I can't say maybe 3 years old, 2 years old. I don't know,
Wow.
I can't remember not doing it,
Yeah.
Yeah. That's pretty amazing.
Kind of the doodles that kids do, that just drawing together. You guys would do that together, and I suppose that makes a lot of sense.
We would make things together. It wasn't only just drawing. We would make costumes. And then as we got older, we started to get more sophisticated, making puppets. We got really hung up on marionettes and hand puppets and ventriloquist puppets. We'd make costumes. Oh, wow. We would build the outfit on each other, whether it be a mummy costume or a Frankenstein monster or a Tyrannosaurus.
Halloween's must have been a lot of fun.
Yeah, we'd spend 6 months getting a costume ready.
I believe it.
And it was like a crime to go buy one. I mean, that was like unthinkable.
Oh, yeah.
You had to build the whole thing from scratch,
Of course.
It's like my mother making cakes. You couldn't possibly go and buy a box cake. It had to be done from scratch.
Absolutely, yeah.
Let alone a cake that's already made. I mean, that's even worse.
Right. Even these days, kids can go and buy a costume at the store, but the ones that are homemade are always the best.
Oh yes. I mean, and you're using your imagination, not somebody else's imagination. It's yours.
Absolutely.
Right. And so it was really just a natural thing for the two of you. And so when you started doing it professionally, it sounds like it was a continuation of that natural inclination.
Totally. And the first job that we had was we were born in Detroit, and there was an industrial film producer, the Jam Handy organization. Okay. I don't know if you ever heard that name. Jameson Handy was the gentleman who started the company back in the silent days. He made training films, and he started basically in New York at the Bray Studios, which was a silent animation studio, along with the Fleischer brothers, Max and Dave Fleischer.
Okay.
So they were friends. And then when Fleischer Studio folded in the 40s, after the couple of features that they made, they came to Detroit and worked at the Jam Handy organization. So they were there for 10 years. And I didn't never meet Max Fleischer, Dave Fleischer, but I met their animators who were still at the Jam Handy organization when Tim and I started in the animation department at the age of 18. We were just got out of high school, enlisted in the Army in the reserves so we wouldn't be drafted at the age of 21. Okay. We spent 6 months active duty. Then we went to a basic art school in Detroit because we were writing letters to Disney for quite some time because we wanted to be animators.
Well, sure.
And they said, go to a studio that focuses on live action, on life drawing, Perspective and Anatomy, which we found in Detroit in 1958, because most of the schools, and there were a lot of schools in Detroit. They had a great art center there.
Wow.
But they were very much, into the abstract expressionist thing. And this old line school taught the old basics. And so that we enrolled there for a 6-month basic art course. And then my dad worked at GM, and he started in the stock room at the GM building and worked his way up to the head of office supply for Chevy for the country. So he had a lot of contacts in the city, and the GM Hagging organization was one of them. So he set up a meeting for us right after our 6-month art school with one of the vice presidents of that company, and they hired us to work in the animation department for $1 an hour.
For $1 an hour?
$1 an hour, $40 a week.
Wow.
But I mean, I should have paid them, because I'm
I'm an
18-year-old kid.
Getting experience, sure.
Totally. It was incredible. Fantastic. So that's how we started. We did a little bit of everything. We started opaquing cells for a training film for the Air Force. And then we graduated up to storyboards and production design, designing films, doing backgrounds, and then finally animation. And then I came to New York and made documentary films for Tim and I did for about 6 or 7 years.
Wow.
Okay.
So it's a crazy career. All through that, we were drawing and painting on our own.
Right.
We had an obsession with comics and animation from a very early age. I mean, that's the sequential art or comic strips were the first thing I'm aware of, because that's what's coming in the front door every day in the newspaper.
Right. Sure.
And so I'm aware. And now you got to get it. I'm 80 years old. So I was born in 1939. So, those in the 40s.
Yeah, mid-40s.
We had Hal Foster's Print Valiant and Flash Gordon and
Flash.
Cherry and the Pirates. And all this great art. And that's what was a huge influence on Tim and me.
Oh, I imagine it would have been.
That's great. Well, there is a question that we ask all of our guests, because we are a Tolkien podcast, and that is, when and how did you first discover Tolkien's work? And then the follow-up question I'd like to add to that is, after discovering Tolkien's work, when and how did you first start doing illustrations based in Middle-earth? We'd really like to hear about, how you discovered this world and what the first steps were on the road for you towards becoming, the figure you became in that world.
Well, these people that I was making the documentary films for, believe it or not, was Fulton J. Sheen. He was a bishop who had this obsession about making Americans aware of the third world. So I made films on world hunger.
Okay.
And one of the women that worked for him in this office in Manhattan, she saw a painting, because Tim and I would do paintings at home and bring them in and show people. And it was like a fantasy scene. And she said, that looks like The Hobbit. This was 1968, maybe. And we said, what's that? She said, I'll bring you the book. So she brought the book in the next day. And that's how we discovered it, through this.
Wow.
So this woman that working for Fulton J. Sheen, bringing in the book. We read it. We went nuts over it.
Yeah.
We said to each other, we got to illustrate this someday. And then we moved out of making films then into general illustration in 1969. And we're illustrating everything from textbooks and readers and golden books and books on animals and fairy tales, and you name it, we were doing it, down to a toilet training book. And believe it or not, yes, that was just the year before we did the Lord of the Rings.
Wow.
It was a toilet training book. And so we kept saying we should, after much illustration and then trying all different things out, like I say, down to the toilet training book, we said, let's try, who published this? Oh, Ballantine Books. Let's give them a call. So in those days, you could pick up the phone and call up somebody, and they'd answer the phone and they'd talk to you. I mean, it was much warmer and cozier. I mean, New York City of all places,
That's true.
So we called Ballantine. The receptionist answered. We said, we'd like to talk to the art director. And they said, sure. She said, sure. She put Ian Summers on the phone, who was a fantastic guy. And we said, well, we're artists and we've done this and this and this. He said, well, we're interested in illustrating the Lord of the Rings, because there was a calendar. That's right. Where we saw that was Tim Kirk.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. There was a calendar. They had just done the Tim Kirk calendar. On the back, they said they were looking for artists who wanted to interpret the Lord of the Rings.
Oh, wow.
Okay. And that was the one right before yours, wasn't it?
Yes.
75, maybe? Yeah.
Yep, 75. And so Tim and I responded to that pitch, and we went in. He looked at our stuff. He liked it a lot, showed us what he was getting in. We were the only two professionals that responded to that.
Wow.
Wow. Everybody else were fans. They were, school kids, college kids, high school kids.
Yeah.
And so it was all amateur artwork or fan art.
Right.
So
and here you are, working professionals, knowing how to actually do an illustration right.
Yeah, pull it off and do the job.
Yeah.
And so he liked what he saw. We brought in a lot of our work that we'd done that had been printed and published, and then we brought in a bunch of sketches that we had done on the subject, on the main key characters and some of the environments.
Yeah.
From the rings, because by this point we had read the entire Lord of the Rings.
Right.
You say we read The Hobbit in '69, but by this point we had gone through and read the entire Rings, and so we were drawing scenes out of it already. And he introduced us to Judy Lynn Del Rey, who was the fantasy and science fiction editor at Ballantine.
Yep.
And then Lester, her husband, Lester Del Rey, the famous writer.
Right.
And Lester, we had to pass their critique, and then they set up an art show for us to bring in everything that we'd ever done just about. So they had this big, huge, massive art show.
Yeah.
And the next week we brought in everything. And Ron Bush was the then president, and he gave the thumbs up. And so they gave us, the first thing they gave us to do was Tolkien's children's book, Farmer Giles of Ham.
Yeah.
Smith of Wooten Major.
Yep.
And Judy gave us that to do to test us out, to see if we could pull this off. And so we did the cover for that book, and she liked it, and Lester liked it, and Ian liked it. So they gave us the first calendar to do.
Good. Wow.
And they left us completely alone. Which were incredible. They just said, just do whatever you want to do. Nobody gave us directives or did they.
Wow.
So now we're rereading the Rings again. Now this time with the idea of illustrating it and marking off all the possible scenes to illustrate. Well, how many is that going to be? I mean, hundreds.
Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of scenes. Yes.
Hundreds and hundreds of possibilities. And it's like, oh my God, we had 6 months to do 12, 13, to narrow 14 it down paintings.
Yeah, right.
Oh my goodness.
So, I mean, we're reading it, we're boiling it down. And, you get very simple. It's like, all right, good guys, bad guys. Right. The key characters. They wanted a centerfold. What's the centerfold? Well, the instant thought was the fellowship. Right. Let's show the fellowship. And then you're just starting to boil it down and get key characters and good guys and bad guys. Inside, outside, exterior, interior. That's where we're making our decision initially.
Okay. Yeah.
And got it down to the amount of illustrations and showed all the drawings, brought them into Ballantine, and basically they approved them. Everybody looked at them and approved them. So we started painting.
Wow.
And then, Tim and I worked together.
Of course.
And we would sit on either side of the easel. We'd mix up our paint in the center between us. And then Tim would sit on one side and I'd sit on the other side. And we both work on the same painting together.
Wow.
And then sometimes I would start one and Tim would be working on another one, and then we'd switch them back and forth, and then work on them together at the same time. So that's how that went for the first calendar. And then now I've been in the business of professional illustration since 1958. And then that first calendar goes out in 75. And then we start to get fan letters. It's the first time I ever got a fan mail. Now we're suddenly kind of like, we had a reputation in the city with all the publishers and whatnot, because we could produce it, we did the job, we did it on time, and we'd take 20 steps further most of the time than they expected us to go, because that's the way you stay in the business,
Yeah.
And so we get all this fan mail starts to come in, and it's all favorable. I mean, if people were writing bad letters, they never showed them to us.
That's why you have an agent, so that nobody shows you those things.
Yeah,
keep that.
Well, we didn't have an agent yet. We were operating just on our own, and so they said, okay, well, the next calendar. I said, that's it. And my idea about that was, well, you ain't seen nothing yet,
right?
So we spent just about a year doing that second calendar, because the paintings got bigger. It became like 6-7 feet across and 5 feet across, and I think much more elaborate. I mean, and we kind of moved too. There's an approach that we took with a lot of the paintings from the first calendar, where we were still kind of in a mindset of The Hobbit as a children's book. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Kind of the more fairy tale type.
And we ourselves were moving out of children's book illustration.
Right.
So we were sort of like looking at it like that until that second calendar. Now it's like that whole mentality got dropped, and it was just boom, just exploring the whole subject, and for what it was, without any mentality towards it being anything other than paintings, And then we spent an entire year on the second one, and then probably 10 months on the third one. And then and they kept escalating in sales each calendar.
Wow. Well, no wonder they kept bringing you back.
Yeah. I mean, well, the rings peaked where in the States here in the 60s.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then it kind of fizzled down for a while. Mm-hmm. And then we did the 76 calendar, and Ballantine then repackaged the book in that box set.
Yeah.
The rings in that box set, and did this whole pitch again, instigating. Judy Lynn and Lester were great at that. They were great people at keeping a project going and they knew how to do it,
Yeah.
So that sort of like brings Tolkien back into the fore again with that box set and everything.
Right.
Absolutely.
And so, it was like I was completely given over to it. I mean, I was building costumes and making armor or all out of cardboard and paper mache.
Sure.
Or armor and whatnot.
Doesn't have to stand up for film. It just has to be enough.
Just to be a model, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Right. Give me clues as to where the highlights and shadows fall,
Right.
And I remember once we were having a posing session with that kind of stuff, cardboard armor and whatnot. And I think we probably had Led Zeppelin on the radio playing. Posing.
Of course, yeah.
And even though it alternated between rock and roll and classical music, but I looked out on my then studio at these 3 or 4 guys making their way across the lawn, looking like they were lost, and they were looking around and looking up at the studio. It was an old 2.5 car garage, and they kind of came outside and asked them, and they said, "Is this the Hildebrandt studio?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I'm Greg Hildebrandt." Oh my God, they were little Lord of the Rings maniacs, right?
Cool, that's so cool.
So I brought them upstairs, and there's all these guys hanging around with cardboard armor, with Led Zeppelin playing, and a few of them, having a few beers.
Sure,
And these guys are completely disillusioned.
Yeah.
There's one kid stood there.
The magic's gone, man.
Yeah. He says,
because you're just a couple of guys at work. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. He said, "This is Middle Earth." I said, "Well, it will be."
Yeah, that's right.
It will be. Use your imagination here. Kind of project, in any event. It was so. It was. I mean, doing those calendars was a ball. It was like incredible.
Oh yeah,
challenging as hell. I mean,
I'm
just
sure.
to boil it down to pick out the scenes,
the timeline, and all that compression to get things selected. My goodness.
Yeah.
And with so much to choose from, just getting it down to 12 to 14 images. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, it got favorable reaction. People liked it, and they had the 4th calendar ready for us to do. By the end of the 3rd calendar, Tim and I are talking, this should be a film. This should be a film. And I never saw it as an animated film, even back then in the 70s. This live action. So we called Ian and said, "Ian, what do you think? What's the deal here? How can we shoot our art, and we could do some storyboards, and we could do a pitch? And he said, let me check into it." So he found out, Saul Zanson optioned it, and Ralph Bakshi was doing it. So, that's over with. We can't do that. So that's why Tim and I went to Urshrak. We said, well, then let's do our own story.
There you go.
And see if we can get it off the ground as a film.
Well, we'll definitely be coming back to the Bakshi adaptation. So I want to kind of put that on the back burner and move to the next question, if that's okay with you.
That's fine. I'll just keep babbling. You know what I mean?
That's great.
This is great. Yeah.
All right. Well, here's a simpler question, I suppose. It's certainly maybe a shorter answer. I don't know. Who are your artistic inspirations, maybe in the past, and who are your artistic inspirations even today?
Oy vey. I mean, I don't know where the hell to begin. Like I say, the first, you have to give it chronologically. I've already said this, but the first artists that I'm aware of are the comic strip artists, the newspaper artists, because that's what's, like I say, coming into our house every day.
Right.
And that's Hal Foster and Alex Raymond and Bern Hogarth and it's all the comic strip guys, and then children's book. And my parents read a lot, and they read all kinds of stuff. And my mother had read most of Edgar Rice Burroughs when she was a teenager. Okay. Which girls weren't supposed to do. Those were only boys' books.
You're right. That's true.
Right? Because they are pretty, little racy. Racy. I mean, everybody's naked on Mars when John Carter gets there. Come on.
Right.
It's true.
Danger Thoris and all that. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, but she had read all those, and she had a lot of those books. We had the Pellucidar stuff, the John Carter books, and the Tarzan books with J. Allen St. John illustrations. And my father too, had a bunch of the classics illustrated by N.C. Wyeth, Treasure Island, Robin Hood. So all that art's influencing me back then, and I'm seeing that stuff. Plus all these Gustav Tenggren. I don't know if you remember that name at all. He styled Disney's Pinocchio.
Oh, okay.
But he was an incredible illustrator who moved across straight realism to very stylistic art, and he was an amazing artist. And so I had a lot of children's books, fairy tale books illustrated by him. And then I remember Arthur Rackham and Edmund Dulac. They had books illustrated by these guys. So I'm looking at all these classic illustrators and growing up on that. Plus, Detroit had a great art museum, one of the best in the country.
Yeah.
And our parents would take us there on the Saturdays. And then gradually we would just make our own way there and spend like a half a day there. And they had a fantastic medieval collection. They had an Egyptian collection. And they had one Caravaggio and the Flemish artists and Rembrandt.
Wow.
And, Diego Rivera, the Mexican muralist.
Yep.
The only surviving mural was the one in Detroit that he had done. Yeah, they hired him to illustrate the automobile industry, basically.
Right.
And so and they were going to whitewash it and tear it down. He was a communist.
Yeah.
Right.
And had done controversial stuff. And so they were going to whitewash it and rip it down. But Edsel Ford, the son of Henry Ford, Edsel was the promoter of the arts and stood up for the mural, and it's survived, thank God. Because I used to go there, aside from politics, I never was into politics. My parents were never into politics. They never discussed anything at home about that kind of stuff. I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah.
Because I never had any programming in one direction or another,
And that's helpful.
But that mural, just artistically, it's mind-blowing when you see it live. If you ever seen pictures of it, there are books on it and everything. But if you're standing there and the size of it, and the scope of it, the complexity of it, oh my God, it's overwhelming. So that used to influence the hell out of me.
Oh, I bet.
And so, I mean, all the old masters, in the comic and Disney, early Disney, because I saw Pinocchio when I was 5.
Oh, wow.
That was the first film that Tim and I ever saw. And it still is in my mind. I can still see myself as a little kid sitting downtown Detroit theater watching that film, and it's just completely blowing my mind. I knew it was artwork. I didn't know what the hell was going on, though.
Yeah.
How it was done. It's
still a great looking film, yeah.
Oh, my God, it's a masterpiece.
Yeah.
Just a water animation alone when Moscow's going through the... I mean, everything about it. And so that was a big, huge impact, I think, from that point. At 5, that became an obsession. We wanted to be animators.
Sure.
So the obsession that we would be taken by would be animation as a primary, and then special effects. Because once we started to see early sci-fi, RXM and Man from Planet X and Destination Moon and George Pal's War of the Worlds, that's where we started. And now our parents moved out of Detroit and in a little tiny house into Rochester, Michigan, which they had 3 acres and a garage and a barn. And we took over the barn and the garage and built miniature sets.
Wow.
So we had an 8mm camera. The first one we got was a Brownie, a spring drive motor, wind up Brownie. And we shot some miniatures with that. And then we finally got a nice Keystone 48 frames a second job. It would shoot slow motion.
Right.
So we built a miniature street scene that was probably, 60 feet long and a half inch to a foot scale. And we worked about 2 years on building the set, and then we wired it all up and shot films of it, with a Martian machine coming down the street, exploding the buildings.
That's great.
Amazing.
Wow.
In those days, it was crazy. This is 54, 55.
Yeah.
We could literally... So Tim and I you couldn't find anything out in books. They hid all the information. Special effects were always considered a secret because the studio didn't want you to know that they were miniatures or matte paintings. And so you dig and finally in a Popular Mechanics magazine or Popular Science, you find an article and they'd clue you in. And I'm reading, powdered magnesium that they use for the explosions. That beautiful mushroom cloud thing.
Right.
Yeah.
And what the hell? Where do you get powdered magnesium? We're in
you can't just go down to the corner pharmacy.
No, you can't. There's nothing, right? So where do you get it? Deductive reasoning. Well, wait a minute. Isn't that the stuff they use? Flash powder. They use that in theater, don't they? Yes, in theater. Well, we opened the yellow pages, and sure enough, there's a theatrical supply shop downtown Detroit. Wow. So we got on the bus and went down there, and there was this great big theatrical supply joint, big warehouse with costumes and props. And I said to the guy, "Do you have flash powder?" He said, "Oh, yeah." So, and you got to get, we're 16 years old, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And two skinny 16-year-old kids.
Yeah.
And he walks over to this cupboard, and this is this rickety old cupboard. He opens it up, and there's like 50 bottles of flash powder in there.
No.
The stuff burns at 2,000 degrees, right?
Yeah.
The whole damn block would have gone up.
Exactly.
and he said, "Well, what do you want?" I said, "Okay, I have 6 bottles." He said, "Oh, yeah, sure." Hands, bum, 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 pay him, walk out the door.
There you go.
Well,
these days you'd have to clear the terrorist watch list in order to get them.
Right? Call your parents, ask for ID. They'd put your name on a list. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. We made our own gunpowder. We go and buy I don't want to say what the ingredients are. Obviously, it's very simple to find.
Right.
Well, yeah.
But we will go to one store and buy one, and go buy the other at the other, so they wouldn't. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Then powdered zinc and powdered aluminum, which zinc burned green, and we would use highway flares because it burned red. And powdered aluminum would sparkle. Give me these beautiful. Anyway, so we got into that whole.
That's great.
Into the special effects pyrotechnics and miniature building, and that's what I wanted to do. Either that or animation. It was one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
And then it gradually led into all kinds of other stuff. But that's what we spent our whole childhood and youth obsessed with.
Wow,
that is wonderful stuff.
So, Greg, I just want to ask a follow-up question to the one you were just talking about your artistic inspirations, because as you're talking about it, I'm thinking of all these things that you said inspired you, and I'm seeing in my head how all these things kind of contributed to sort of that Brothers Hildebrandt style. You mentioned medieval, and I'm thinking of your picture of Eowyn fighting the Witch King, which to me has such a sort of a medieval illumination or tapestry kind of quality. Was there ever a sense from the two of you that you were trying to put a bunch of different styles together, or was it just sort of it all just kind of got into your minds and you're just sort of creating what you create?
Yeah, I think up to that point we were emulating different styles of artwork. As young guys, you know what I mean. You're influenced by this, and you try this. But I think by the Rings art, though, it isn't so much like trying to come up with a style. It just you just start painting or whatever. All those influences are there.
They just come out.
Yeah.
They just come out automatically on their own. I mean, you just sit down and paint. Basically,
that makes sense.
And I mean, there are guidelines to composition that we followed that go back to Howard Pyle, and which goes back to the ancient Greeks. The golden rectangle and all that business.
Right. Yeah.
The basic key guides that we use for composition, and that's kind of like always there. And that's kind of it became an automatic. So we used to measure it all out back earlier on, where the focal point, the primary center of interest, the secondary center of interest, coming out of Andrew Loomis's books. I don't know if you ever heard of Andrew Loomis. He was an illustrator that wrote a series of educational books were, I think, the best ever done. Period. End of story.
Wow. Okay.
Andrew, Loomis. For any kids, anybody's out there wants to read and look and find. I mean, he teaches you the whole schmear, man, and he's a master painter, drawer, compositionalist. Fantastic. In any event,
I know we have a lot of artists who listen to the show, a lot, and I have a feeling they're going to really enjoy that tip.
Yeah, we had those books and we studied that stuff, and I think those rules and ideas that he had applied to, they still do to what I do, to this day. Yeah, it just all kind of like mixes together and comes out, and whatever comes out like, it comes out like,
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, we know that Tolkien, of course, was an illustrator as well, but what resonates with most of us, of course, are his words. Now, how did you and Tim go about taking a scene from Tolkien and interpreting that visually? Did you find yourself inspired by a moment in the story, thinking, I've got to paint that? Or do certain passages kind of paint a picture in your head and you try to put that on paper or canvas?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a little of each of that. But I mean, I think, again, the basic rule that we're following as far as making a decision about the pictures is to the good guys and the bad guys.
Yeah.
Exterior, interior.
Yeah.
Time of day, moonlight, firelight, sunlight. Those are key things that we're looking at to try to break it up so that you don't have all the same looking pictures in the calendar.
Yeah. Right.
You see? And then it's key scenes that are striking us that we want to illustrate, or key characters, that you want to make sure that you cover. Even though I never really figured that I covered them all for sure, even in the 3 calendars that we did, Because
there are a lot of characters. It's a big, complex legendarium.
Oh my God, overwhelming. And and then we read him to make sure that we were covering what he described and made sure that you kept it accurate to that. What he, like Lothlorien, he pretty much the structure of the trees and everything. And at certain points, he wouldn't describe everything in detail. So now you're left open to, take your own interpretation, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know why we ended up making the orcs sort of like this combination of a bunch of medieval and Romanesque and Persian. It just mixed together into this crazy thing.
Yeah.
I don't know why right now. It just seemed to work for us back then,
Yeah.
But I think for most of the letters that we got, the thing about being an illustrator and taking Tolkien, he wasn't that hot on people illustrating his subject matter.
True. That's true.
Because once you draw it or paint it or pin it down, now it's out. It's not left up to the imagination of the reader.
Exactly. That's right.
So, you're in your head visualizing this. And I always felt, and Tim and I both, we got that responsibility as an illustrator is at least to try to be as accurate as you can to the text.
Yeah. What it says, try to represent that as best you can. Yeah.
Yeah. And also to put yourself in the scene. That was Howard Pyle, the father of American illustration. And, said, you put yourself in the scene. You put yourself right in the middle of the thing. So that's always the effort to kind of like put yourself in the middle of it all.
Okay.
And to be able to create this scene that you then pull other people, the viewer into,
Okay.
So, I'm rereading the text as we're illustrating and making sure that things are accurate. And then sometimes you'd miss it. And Lester Del Rey, who is the resident Tolkien expert over at Ballantine, he knew those books my God, he was incredible. I remember we were painting some arrow feathers, one color. I don't remember what the hell they were right now. And he said, those arrow feathers are the wrong color. It was on I think the scene with Faramir could have been. In any event, he said the arrow colors are wrong. And I said, oh, they are? He said, yeah, page, blah, 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 book, blah, blah, blah. And sure enough, you open it up and there it is.
There you go.
So he had this photographic memory, which was astounding.
We get that too. Not in that we have it, but that our listeners do. So when we make a mistake, we find out very quickly exactly what that mistake was.
We hear very quickly, when we misstated something.
Yeah.
I have a follow-up question to that's not in our notes there, Shawn. And I know that our listeners are going to want to know this. You were talking about, where you would take liberties and, trying to stay true to the text, and then where you had the opportunity to kind of do a little interpretation. I know that our listeners would love to know a little bit about the decision behind making the Hobbit's feet large. It's not said in the text one way or the other, so they could be. We do know they're hairy, right? We have that.
Yeah, that we know.
So what was the thought process there? I'm just curious, and I know our listeners would be too.
I thought, Hobbit sounds like rabbit. Rabbit have big feet.
There you go.
Simple as that.
There you go.
Because they're they're halflings and they're half human, but they got to be something other than that. Proportionately, I saw them more like children's proportions. Bigger heads, smaller bodies, but bigger hands and bigger feet.
It's like adult feet, choice, but with a no, that makes sense.
Right.
I hear what you're saying, because certainly their height is indeed that of a child, so that makes some sense.
But for stability,
fully grown,
bigger feet, and they're certainly large around the waist usually.
Yeah.
And the scene in where Bilbo's doing his memoirs, and we've done him as an old man, white hair.
Oh yeah. I know that. Of course.
And I put mutton chops on him, okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like the sideburns. Mm-hmm. And Lester Del Rey said, we brought the drawing in, and he said, Hobbits do not have hair on their faces. There's no facial hair. He was insistent and adamant about it.
Yeah.
And I argued with him. If you presented a good argument to Lester, he would give in. He loved to argue. Not for the sake of he liked to learn him. You know what I mean?
Right.
The guy just liked it. He would pick an argument with a punch bowl if there was nobody else around. You know what I'm saying? and he did. He knew a lot of stuff. My God, this guy was mind blowing. And I said, Lester, how about you know? Well, I have to know it to write science fiction. And he finally gave in. I said, look, it gives him more character. He's sitting there writing his memoirs. He's an old guy, and he's there. And it just, if I can get that white sideburns, like John Adams sort of like thing down the side of his face.
Yeah.
And he said, good. Oh, fine, kid, go ahead and do it. Even though it's not in the books, it's not in the text. Right. But that's part of my
artistic liberty. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And your application of,
Yeah.
And you get that sort of that wise old scholar concept.
Yeah,
exactly.
I think so. Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, Greg, I'd like to ask a little bit more about your process, working with your brother. You described a scene to us a moment ago of the two of you sort of working together on the same piece. And I'd love to hear just a little bit more about, some of your memories of working with him. I think most of our listeners will know that, he did pass away in 2006.
Yeah.
And I think we'd just love to hear more about your stories of working with him and sort of you editing. I love the idea of you sort of working together, editing each other's work, kind of sharing the responsibilities. I'd just love to hear more, not so much a question, I guess, but I'd just love to hear more about that if you can.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like again, Tim and I were two different people, different personalities, but when it came to art, when it came to work when it came to the subjects that we were obsessed with, we became one mind. And so it was almost like we would just, if we knew it was, we'd say, this scene's a moonlight scene. By this point, by the point of doing that art, in 75 for the first calendar, we knew exactly every single color that we would have to mix up for a moonlight scene on any given surface area that we were painting. It was just an automatic conversation by that point between the two of us. And then let's say any particular scene, Tim would draw a scene. We would take a setup, a scene, say the Return of Gandalf on that rock where the rays of light are coming down.
Yep.
And he would do a take on it, a sketch, and I would do a sketch on it. And then we'd look at the both of them and decide which one was better, develop one or develop them both a little more, and then land on one. Either I would do it or he would do it, and they would work back and forth like that. Or if we were working on it, and that would be if he would take it home and work on his sketch, and I would be at my home working on my sketch, and then we get together the next day. Or we would be together with a piece of paper on a drawing board, and both of us are drawing on it, making comments, and discussing it as we're drawing it. So it's like one guy doing it in a sense.
Wow.
Once it came to the next phase in this particular case, after a finished sketch, we would then do a posing session with models. And in this case, it were mainly all of our friends posing, putting costumes on.
Right.
And so we'd get those people all together and we would do the photo shoot for a whole day. And the two of us working together, on directing the people and getting them in the right pose and getting the lights all set up in the right positions, shoot them, get the film processed, and then do the final sketches together. But I mean, again, either if we're working together in the same spot in the studio, we're working on a gigantic drawing board that's probably 10 feet across, 12 feet across. And we're all stretched out on that, moving stuff around. And that whole process continued to the painting. And so Tim we'd transfer it to, in those cases, with the Tolkien stuff, we painted on Duran board or masonite or, like wood panels and gessoed white with white gesso, and then transfer your drawing onto it with carbon paper with a ballpoint pen, tracing it. And then we would start to mix the paint up together. Again, like I say, if it's a moon scene off the Greyhaven scene where there's a moonlet and then there's two sconces on either side and in the foreground. So there's a cool light and a warm light. And then we're mixing up those palettes of the cool light and the warm light together. How much orange, how much yellow, and discussing it and then applying it to see what works right. And when one guy may start to apply the paint on the board, one of us would sit behind in a chair, maybe 10 feet behind, 8 feet behind, looking, studying, and saying, no, a little more yellow, that's a little more orange. We would direct each other like that.
Yeah.
So we got the palette exactly right. And then sit down next to each other with the palette between us on a table between us, and then just start to dip into the paint, start spreading paint around, crossing over each other's arms, paint. It was like
that's so cool.
It was
what
like that
experience.
And then when we did the Star Wars movie poster for the first film, that we basically worked out the sketch at the shop, at the studio with the guys over there that handled the job. Came home, grabbed models to pose for the characters because they didn't give us shots of them in that lighting setup. I needed that lighting setup with the sword light coming from above. So threw some bathrobes on people, shot Polaroid, basically.
I love it, yeah.
And then we gessoed the board, transfer the drawing after it was all done, And by this time, this was a 36-hour job. They needed it real quick. We had to work literally around the clock to get it done. So by this time, it's probably 1 o'clock in the morning. And I think I took a nap first, and then Tim started painting. And then he woke me up. He took a nap. I kept painting. And we do that for 15, 20 hours or so. And then we both together finished that painting. Sometimes we work like that, you know, on and off, and then both together.
And then together. Right?
Yeah. And sometimes he would take the painting home and work on it for a while. And I would keep one at my place and work on it for a while. And then we get back together the next day and swap them back and forth. Hand the palette, because we pre-mix our paint into pallets and then put them in a Tupperware airtight container. So that stayed wet, you know?
Right.
Yeah. And that way you're each working with the same palette. Right.
Yep, exactly.
Wow,
so we evolved our method of painting and mixing paint together because it had to work in that manner that he could take it home and I could take it home.
That's incredibly collaborative.
That is amazing. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
go ahead, Alan. Sorry.
I'm still just amazed at how collaborative that is and how effective it is.
Yeah, no, it was, effective is definitely the word. I mean, again, but that's our background too. I mean, we were always working in the business, you know what I mean? Working in an animation, starting in an animation studio, it's a collaborative effort between, 20 people, you know?
Absolutely.
And so we knew how to do all that, and we had no problem with that. A lot of people have a problem, artists, working with other people. I never did.
Right.
First of all, because I'm a twin, and I like working with other people,
That's true.
Yeah.
So in 4 eyes are better than 2, especially if the other 2 eyes know what to look for, you know?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. It depends. If the other 2 eyes are mine, that's probably not your best bet. I'm just thinking.
Okay.
Yeah, that looks good. That looks good.
That looks good. That's all right. Yeah.
There you go.
Well, I still get that now. You know, see, Jean constantly, who you were just on the phone with.
Yeah.
She is constantly, no, that's not that. Look at that. It's over there. But she's constantly coming back and pointing things out. And you know, it's like working on a so-called representational realism there's a lot going on, you know? And you're focused over here. You're not seeing this red flasher going on in the corner. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And so that you need that kind of input.
You do.
You know?
Yeah.
Coming back to Middle Earth a little bit, do you have a particular favorite character, place, or scene from Tolkien's work that you enjoy depicting more than others? And then as a follow-up to that, is there any character or place in Middle Earth that you didn't get to draw or paint, but that you really would have liked to? Or that you'd still like to, for that matter?
I would. I would like to, and there's lots of them, and I couldn't name one off the top of my head right now, but there's plenty of them. But my favorite character to draw or paint is Gandalf.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he's the main man as far as I'm concerned. You know what I'm saying? So he's the main guy.
Okay.
That's it right there.
Was there a particular scene with Gandalf that was your favorite?
Oh, I know just about.
I like the return scene he described just a moment ago. That's one of your pictures that really stands out in my head.
That does resonate.
Yeah. And that those rays of light are not in the text. I mean, it's like he doesn't describe it like that. If you go back and read it, there's no. But Tim and I figure, well, my God, this is a supernatural scene here. You know what I'm saying?
It is.
Yeah. And then it's Tolkien's coming out of that. The group that he was with, you know, C.S. Lewis and that Christian, the Catholic thing and religious art and all that stuff. And I grew up with all that, you know, with all that stuff. And so rays of light always imply this supernatural quality, I think, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like that kind of like thing that we were trying to convey with that, you know?
Well, and that fits absolutely well with Tolkien's vision of what happened to Gandalf.
Absolutely.
You know.
That same spiritual quality, it's one of my favorite paintings actually, is The Healing of Eowyn.
Oh, yes.
That's one of my favorite paintings I did in that all of them. There's something I saw that as very operatic. I wanted to look like opera, grand opera, and I wanted to look like almost like a classical, spiritual, religious painting sort of like thing. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you achieved both of those.
Definitely. Definitely. And I've noticed that the rays of light behind Gandalf has been picked up by at least one film that I can think of. So
yes, indeed. That was not in the book. Let me put it to you that way.
Right.
And several other things without getting into details right now. Okay.
Oh, we might get into details soon enough. Shawn, you've got a question on adaptations, right?
I do have a question about movie adaptations because I know, right when you and Tim were working on the calendars, 76, 77, 78, that's right at the same time that we're starting to get the animated adaptations. We had Rankin and Bass's The Hobbit in 1977, Ralph Bakshi's Lord of the Rings, you mentioned, in 1978. Now, of course, we've got the Peter Jackson films. I'm curious your thoughts on, what effect the movie adaptations have had on artists visualizing Tolkien's world, especially today, working after those movies.
Oh, I think a lot of them have been influenced by that,
Yeah.
they're, I'm not going to name names, but
Sure.
it's like it couldn't help it. I mean, if you were see
Sure.
those things, they were powerfully, extremely well done. My God, they're incredible.
Yeah.
It's like it was like it's you can read the trilogy and say this is an impossible movie to make, and yet he pulled it off.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
so massively complex. How the hell are you going to make this? Even though I
Yeah.
wanted to try it at a time.
Yeah.
But you're young and you wade into the waters. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And no, I think it had a huge influence on the way people illustrate it now, for sure, big
Yeah.
time.
Yeah,
So
we see that, I think, in a lot of the fan art.
yeah.
What would you say,
Yeah.
Shawn? Probably 3 out of 4 pieces of fan art really are clearly based on the more recent
Sure.
film
Yeah.
adaptations.
You see representations of, specific actors as opposed to characters. Yeah.
Yeah, as opposed to the
Exactly.
characters, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I like to see people going back and just use their own imaginations again.
Yeah,
Just to
Yeah.
block all that out and just, do your own thing.
Yeah.
exactly.
But like you were saying earlier, when you come to it without having a lot of pictorial imagery to work from, and you're just looking at the text, you're just looking at the words.
That's
and,
it.
Yeah.
And
That's
how
it.
that,
And
how
it's
that
just
comes
you and
together.
it, baby.
Yeah.
It's do your thing,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it's like there wasn't much around when that I saw. I only saw Tim Kirk's calendar and the Tolkien's art. That's all I saw before I
Right.
did the calendars. So
Yeah.
I think Frazetta did some things by this point, but I hadn't seen it. They were black and white
Mm-hmm.
stuff.
I've
Yeah.
seen some of Frazetta's. Yeah.
And had Pauline Baines done anything at that point? I know she'd done the map, but I don't know if it was at that point.
I don't know. I can't
Because
remember.
that map had some amazing work in the borders of the Fellowship of the Writers and things like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, if all you'd seen was Tim Kirk's
was
and
it.
then Tolkien's own, not a lot
was
to
it. I
go off of.
Yeah, I had no idea that it would lead to what it led to. I mean, I wanted to illustrate it because I wanted to illustrate it because I thought it was an
as an
incredible
artist.
subject to
Yeah.
illustrate, and I just wanted to do it. And then, bam! All of a sudden, it became this thing, and we're swept
Yes,
up
it
into
did.
this.
Well, the timing was right. You'd mentioned that Del Rey did a really good job of kind of getting the books back out there into the public consciousness. That their popularity had peaked in the 60s. But of course, timing was right as well in the fact that in 1977, that's when the Silmarillion was published. So there was another kind of renewal of interest in Middle Earth,
Right,
as
exactly.
people were coming back to visit it. So there's no doubt that timing really influenced, I think, just how widely influential your work ended up being for people who who read Tolkien's work.
Well, it was fun to do, and I feel privileged to have done it. That's the way I see it now.
Yeah.
It was an amazing couple of years that we spent on it.
Yeah.
But I could have kept it up, and I wanted to do my own thing. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
That's why I did Ursharak.
Yeah.
Because they had the fourth calendar ready for us to contract ready to sign and go on to the fourth calendar.
Yeah.
And but I didn't want to keep it up and be that main and the only, because I'm you can see the career I've had, it's all over the place, and I like I don't like staying only being known for one thing. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Right.
And that actually leads perfectly into my next question. So thank you for the most incredible segue that you could have ever written.
Okay.
In addition to Tolkien, you've created art inspired by many different fantasy and sci-fi worlds. So I want to ask, what are the differences between adapting a literary work like Tolkien's, where you talked about just being, true to the text, taking liberties where there's room, as opposed to a more visual medium like movies or comics? How does the existing visual aspect of those other genres impact your work as an illustrator in comparison to just strict literary works?
Well, I mean, you're dealing with stuff that's all designed, like doing Marvel stuff. And Captain America has been there since 1941. So, and I'm into this,
True.
But I don't know how to exactly explain that. So I get as much thrill out of it or excitement about it as doing something from ground zero, like illustrating any of the. Gene had a publishing company for years, Unicorn Publishing, and we would, I don't know if you're aware of those, but we would select all these classics to do. Robin Hood, Peter Pan, public domain books, Alice in Wonderland.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Okay.
And works of Edgar Allan Poe, the Dracula, oh my God, Hanukkah Treasury, a Christmas Treasury. And those are all from the Christmas Carol, favorite fairy tale book. And those are all from the text too, which are, they're a thrill to do and extremely enjoyable. But I like, the aspect of going to Marvel and doing their characters is a completely different. Now I'm focused mainly on just composition and action and It isn't like having to conceive the entire thing from ground zero. It's a different kind of gig. It's I don't take it any less enthusiastically. Do you know what I'm saying?
Good. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I do. I hear that.
And another whole special gig is like working with now deceased Paul O'Neill in the Trans-Siberian Orchestra.
Oh, yeah.
The orchestra.
I saw some of your work for them, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's been a whole completely different thing for the last 16 years for me.
Wow.
It's like working with Mr. O'Neill, who passed away 2 years ago. For example, he was composing a rock opera, which is still underway with after he died, and Romanov. It's about the Russian Revolution.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
And it's an amazing music, incredible. So Paul would show us the music, and we'd listen to it. He'd send us some text, and I'd do drawings out of it. And then he would music in a rough form, and he'd be using my drawings, my rough comps and sketches to show his performers to get them into the right disposition,
wow.
that he wanted for Rasputin or Lenin or whoever.
Yeah.
Right.
And
right.
so that became a whole special gig that had nothing to do with anything else that I'd ever done, which I'm still thrilled to do because I'm working with his daughter now, who has taken over the whole creative aspect of the band. And
Good.
And that's kind of a fantasy fulfilled for me after I saw Fantasia as a kid, working with music.
Work with music,
music,
sure.
and that's a whole other special area. And it's just, and I love it all. I love just jumping all over the place and doing all kinds of stuff,
That's great.
That's great.
Well, I want to ask you a little bit more about Star Wars because I have to let you know that for years I had a reprint of your Star Wars poster. It was actually the first Star Wars related poster that my wife and I bought. Well, some 20 years ago, but anyway, I digress. But I just
we do that.
And now we've got Star Wars art all over the upstairs. But anyway,
and I can say that I visited them briefly, and oh my goodness, is there any spare space on the walls in your house? No,
right. But no, all of our Star Wars art started with the Brothers Hildebrandt Star Wars B poster.
Yeah.
I would like to know. You talked a little bit about your process working on that. I'd like to know a little bit about how you got involved in the first place.
Oh yeah.
That's a very interesting story because, I mean, after that toilet training book, right?
yeah.
And we said, like, let's try for something more interesting. This was 1973 now. This is before the Lord of the Rings art.
Right.
And we said, let's go see if we can find a movie poster company to work with. Maybe we can get some a little more interesting jobs out of that, Yeah. So, again, you open the yellow pages. There it is. You kind of
make some phone calls. Yeah.
Wow.
Make some phone calls and land on this one place. And I said, yeah, bring your portfolio in. They'd say, come on over.
Wow.
It worked like that. It really was that simple.
Yeah.
And brought a portfolio over to this ad agency in the mid 50s in Manhattan, Midtown, and walked upstairs into the art director's office. And there was a bunch of paintings sitting around his office for Mel Brooks's Young Frankenstein. And I said, what the hell is this? He said, well, Mel Brooks has done Frankenstein. I said, I'm a big Mel Brooks fan. He's doing Frankenstein. What do you mean? Yeah, it's in black and white. It's blah, 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 blah. I said, well, you got to do a poster. I have to do a poster. I never met these guys. Tim and I both got all enthusiastic. We have to do a poster. And he said, well, look, the budget's all gone. No money left. And they're being shipped out tomorrow morning to Brooks in California. And I said, I don't care. We'll do it. We'll do it overnight. We'll bring it in tomorrow. I said, what are you, crazy? I said, no, please. So they said, oh, it's up to you. So they gave us a bunch of 8x10 glossies out of the movie. Tim and I worked the setup on the train going back from New York to Jersey where we lived, I still live in Jersey. And we worked the setup out, and we got home and I grabbed a couple of people to pose for Polaroid shots. We banged out a painting overnight. We literally, it was very painterly, like old pulp covers from the 30s and 20s, and brought it back in the next day. They were flabbergasted that we literally did a painting overnight. They didn't use it.
Oh, man.
But 3 years later, we get a phone call while we're working on our own story. We had done the rings already, so we were famous for that. We had a fame now, a reputation.
Right.
And we were working on our own novel, Urshak, and my phone rang in my studio, and it's these guys calling. You got to help us out. We got a science fiction movie here. The director doesn't like the poster he's got, and he needs it. And the movie's coming out in a week. And I said, okay. So we jumped on the train. Went into the city, went over the whole job with them. They showed us the Tom Young poster, which is already done, right? The Tom Young one.
Yeah.
And I said, well, what do you want? And he said, well, they want this setup, but more comic booky. I said, well, what the hell does that mean, comic booky?
Right.
And they said, well, I don't know. So they gave us we worked it out, talked it over.
That's helpful.
Yeah. Not very. They gave us a bunch of stuff. We went home, came back to my studio, literally did it, grabbed, like I say, a couple of people put bathrobes on them and posed them for the two main characters, and then did the final drawing, and then a bunch of drawings, sketches, and then the final one, and then stayed up around the clock doing the painting, like we said. And that's how that worked. And we brought the painting back in, and the droids weren't in the painting at that time. And I said, you need something in the background. We're on the right-hand side there. And they said, well, let me call the director. So they went around the corner, and they called Lucas. and the guy came back into this other room, and he said, he said, put these droids in there, these two robots in there. And so they ran out and got us some paint. I told them the paint that I needed, and we put it in and painted it in while we were at their shop, in there.
Wow.
And they said, oh, by the way, he wants you to make your name bigger. Because we signed our name Hildebrandt, just block letter back in the day. And we had it tiny on when we signed the final piece of artwork. And apparently George Lucas wanted our name bigger because he knew our work and knew that we had a reputation. The name had a reputation.
Sure, he wanted to get that fantasy, the fantasy cred. Yeah.
So make your name bigger, which never generally doesn't happen anywhere with this kind of work. You know what I'm saying?
Here, take more credit than you were originally going to take.
That's right, exactly. So anyway, the movie comes out. The poster, we had an agreement to use it as a one sheet outside the theater in newspaper ads, but it comes out not only there, but as a product. They used it on everything, T-shirt, you name it.
Yeah.
So then we were swept up into the Star Wars mania.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, you guys weren't probably even born yet, right?
Oh, no, I saw Star Wars on the opening weekend.
Or did you? Yeah.
I was one, but I did see it in the theater when it first came out. Yeah.
Okay, that doesn't count. I actually remember it, Shawn.
I was young. I was very young, but I did see it.
I was 9 and loved it. Absolutely.
I've been a fan my entire life, yeah.
The wave that swept around the world with that thing was like a gigantic tidal wave.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, wham!
Nothing had ever been seen like that. Yeah.
And you couldn't, I bet you couldn't have had any idea that it would become that. And you would still be working in that world decades later.
Nothing. No idea. No idea about any of this lasting. You just do it.
Yeah.
In my case, it was a job that I did back then. They handed me a job to do, and I did the job, and I did it to their satisfaction. And when I'm back to Ur-Sharak, you know what I mean?
Yeah. There you go.
Then I tried to get Ur-Sharak off the ground as a film through the William Morris Agency. John Dykstra got on board. John Dykstra had split from Lucas, and started his own company, Apogee. He was doing Battlestar Galactica on television.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we did our Ur-Sharak pitch to him. And he said, I'm on board. I want to do the special effects.
Wow.
He got a friend of his, Dennis Linton Clark, who had just done Comes a Horseman. And he was going to do the screenplay. In fact, he did a really nice adaptation. But it kind of like sank under its own undoability. Like Dykstra was saying, he could do Ur-Sharak for $30 million. Star Wars had just been done for $10 million, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Dykstra said he could do it for $30 million. We threw at the William Morris Agency. They kept pitching it, and we kept pitching it with them. So all kinds of producers and directors, and it kind of like sank under its own undoability. Because Joseph E. Levine, you remember that name at all?
Yes.
Joseph Levine came in to look at our pitch. He said, what I saw there is going to cost $145 million to produce. And this was 1977, 78, 79.
Wow.
So it kind of like came to an end. Yeah. So, but nonetheless, we did have John on board, and he was Apogee was an amazing operation. Because that was the original ILM,
Yeah, they really were.
And so the original, I saw the Dykstra Flex camera right there, the one that started it all.
My goodness.
It was fantastic.
We've gotten some more insight, Shawn, on things like film production and behind the scenes stuff that I didn't expect to hear today. I was thinking all painting and visual arts rather than some of the film stuff. But that's been one of the special treats of today's interview. Yeah, well, that's been my real early love was film and animation and all that stuff. So it's been great.
It all comes together in illustration. I mean, all those obsessions. They kind of merge. Because you're dealing with all those elements, drama, composition, color, light, movements, sets, props, costumes, everything,
Yeah, all of it.
Absolutely.
Got another question for you here. Between our podcast audience and our social media, we hear from a lot of artists out there. In fact, we've had the pleasure of getting some wonderful gifts of Tolkien art from some of our listeners. And we know that Tolkien's work continues to inspire a lot of up-and-coming artists today, and not just the film adaptations, but Tolkien's actual work. How has the industry changed for artists This is a big question.
Oh,
how has the industry changed for artists since the days when you and Tim were starting out? Obviously, the internet's had some impact, but we're curious to know whether it's changed for the better or for the worse, or maybe in which ways has it changed for each, for the typical young artist.
I really can't answer that. I mean,
okay, fair enough.
Yeah, because I mean, I keep making my way doing what I do, which is to say, a pencil on a piece of paper, and paint on a canvas. I mean, what I don't know anything about computer art, nothing, and I know you have to know all this today to do work in the business. You know, you have to know computer, you have to know how to do it all, and so I'm totally unqualified to answer that question. Completely,
that is a fair answer.
Yeah.
There's no way that I can make a statement about the way that I entered the business as to the way that people enter the business now. You know,
because you don't know the latter. You can't compare it if you don't know it. Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, and there's no. I don't think people have access to the way it was back when, like I've explained to you. I could.
Well, they certainly can't just pick up the phone
and call somebody.
That's what I'm saying. You could do that with any ad agency, with any publisher in the city, and they would say, come on in.
Yeah.
And you would literally, it was very human, and you'd sit there and they would meet with you, go into their office, and you'd talk with them. And I don't hear now, I mean, even if you know somebody in the business for 25 years, you got to make a meeting 4 weeks in advance to have a phone conversation with them. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Yeah. That doesn't exist. It was never that way then. It was very different. I don't know what the hell to say today. You know?
Yeah.
I think it's probably much more difficult.
I'm sure it is.
For an artist or an illustrator to make their way in this. I mean, especially now when so much can be done on a computer. There are so many people that can produce artwork that you had to do it all from scratch when I was starting out. You know, you had to know how to work a pencil on a piece of paper. You know how to do perspective. You had to know how to draw vanishing points and horizon lines and do all that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? By hand. You know? Now it's a lot of it you work on a computer. And so I don't know what the hell to say. I think
that's fair enough.
My guess would be it would be more difficult today.
I think you're probably right. Yeah. Combine that with the just the flooded marketplace, the fact that there's so many artists.
There's so much out there. Yeah.
When you stop and look at how many great comic book artists there are, you look at this stuff today, and it's beautiful. I mean, by comparison, if you go back 40 or 50 years, it wasn't all that great. A lot of this stuff, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, not in comparison today. You're right.
A lot simpler, not as much color, and
right, exactly. Well, the
cream
color
has really
was
risen
flat.
to the top.
Right.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So, I don't know if that helps anything.
It does.
Yeah. Well, Greg, I'd like to ask about the Spiderweb Art Gallery, which you founded with your wife, Jean, in 1995. And folks can find you on the web, and we'll post a link to your gallery webpage in our show notes. But, I mean, you've got a host of stuff that's available there, everything from postcards and prints and art books. There's a 2012 collection, the Tolkien Years of the Brothers Hildebrandt, that's available there. And you've even got original paintings and sketches by the Brothers Hildebrandt, by yourself, and, by a host of other artists that are working in all these genres we've been talking about, fantasy, science fiction, and comics and more. I read the statement on your website about what you're about, and I really like this idea that you put out there that art is for everyone. And I'd like to ask you to talk a little bit about that, if you can, just so listeners can understand why you started Spiderweb Art and what you offer there.
Well, to make art available for everybody. I mean, and there's stuff that price-wise that, for people who can buy sketches that can't afford to buy a painting. I'm a firm believer in that. Jean's always been a believer in that. We've known each other for 40 years. She's been my agent and manager and creative partner and soulmate and everything else for the last 40 years. And that's our firm belief together, is that art is for everybody, and you have to make it available for everybody. You just can't make it for this elitist few. Yeah. I mean, I don't believe in that kind of elitist mentality. That's why I'm a big fan of Diego Rivera, who painted only murals for public view. He didn't do
for everybody. Yeah,
it was for everybody. Art for the people, and that is I've always believed that, and that's what
you couldn't own that and lock it up in your private gallery. That's the whole idea. It's for everyone. Yeah,
right, for everybody. And it's access to people with limited income. You want to make sure that people can have original artwork.
Yeah.
So that's been the founding belief of Spiderweb Art, basically, right there.
And it's great. And there's a ton of stuff there on that site. I would encourage our listeners to go check it out. And I'll post a link in our show notes. But just any price range, any type of art, especially in these genres we've been talking about, these nerdy genres of fantasy and science fiction and comics. And
comics. While we've been talking, I've been drawing a Marvel cover.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow. I'm impressed.
Three of the Avengers.
Oh, wow.
Captain America, Captain Marvel, and the Black Widow. It's
That's
my next
great.
cover. It's my next cover for Marvel. So I've been working on that while I've been talking with you guys.
You'll have
Excellent.
to when it's all done, you'll have to shoot us a copy of that so we can see what you're working on. That's great.
Yep.
Well, obviously you still work every day, so and we now know what's immediately next for Greg Hildebrandt in general.
That's right.
But what do you have any other big projects kind of on the horizon? Anything that you want to tell our listeners about?
My work for the Trans-Siberian Orchestra, which I'm going to ready to start next week, will be for this year's show, and that'll be. Gene designs the program here for them, which is an elaborate book. It's a beautifully produced book. She looks at about 40,000 photographs, which a half a dozen photographers cover the show from last year, and then she'll edit through 40,000 pictures to boil it down to the shots that she wants to use for the program. And then I start to do artwork, storytelling art, for we would talk with Paul's daughter and other people over at TSO and discuss the subject of the show this year. And then I'll try to reflect that with a bunch of paintings that I'll be doing for the covers. I do these big 4-page fold-out paintings generally for the covers, and or also for their T-shirts. And then my art will be on the LED screens in the show too. So that'll be that's the big main project that I'll be starting right away next. And then Gene's working on a book. It's already at the publisher, IDW, on the Marvel art of the Brothers Hildebrandt. They'll be doing that big. It's like a 300-page book. Then we're talking with them also a book on my pinup art. My retro more pinup art. And I keep doing that. I have a whole line of those to do that I'm working on. And I'm still working on a line of posters that I love of movies that if I was hired to paint the posters when I was a kid, if I was a professional back then, you know what I'm saying?
Oh, that's a great idea.
Some of those King dream Kong projects
and stuff like that. I want to do it,
Yeah, how fun would that be?
Great.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, I got a sequential art comic, that 6-book story that I'm working on with my son. He's a writer. He's written it. I'm illustrating it. It's neat. About a historical figure, and we're doing our take on him. A more fantasized take, alternate history sort of like thing.
Oh yeah,
and oh my God, there's a whole. I got a bunch of
now, should I point out is that your son Greg Jr.? He wrote the text for the Tolkien collection book that you got out, right? Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I just want to make sure our listeners know that.
Yeah. And that's him. And oh my God, it slips my mind. I got so much stuff that I'm working on.
Is there anything else that you're working on now or in the future inspired by Tolkien?
Not at the present moment.
Okay.
Even though I would like to. And, there's so many scenes that I want to do yet that's still out there. All the doors are open in my head. Every door is open. There's no closed doors. You know what I'm saying?
That's great.
Excellent. I love that. All right. Well, thank you for joining us, Greg. It has been great to talk to you about your work, and we really do appreciate the time that you've given to us and our listeners. We would be happy to have you back on the show at any time.
I'd love to come back.
All right. Well, thank you. We'll work that out. All right. Well, listeners, that's going to do it for another episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast.
That's right, but we will be back next week to start the last chapter of Book 1 of The Lord of the Rings, Flight to the Ford.
And you've got a whole week to read that chapter, so before you do, why not check out Greg Hildebrandt's online gallery at www.spiderwebart.com. There you'll find a whole lot of cool stuff for your Tolkien collection and beyond.
Yeah, absolutely. And as always, we want to remind you briefly about the Fellowship of the Podcast. That's our family of supporters over at Patreon. If you'd like to see how we're doing towards our Patreon goals, you can see them over at patreon.com/prancingponypod.
And if you're looking for a new Tolkien book, check out the official library pages at our website, theprancingponypodcast.com, where we've put together a set of links for our listeners to all the books we've ever mentioned on the show, Tolkien-related or otherwise. And if you wouldn't mind posting a review on iTunes, we'd be grateful for that. That increases our visibility, which means more new listeners, more great questions for Barliman, more discussion on social media, and a more vibrant Tolkien community.
And speaking of social media, it's also very helpful if you share us there. So Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, wherever you happen to find Tolkien fans, let them know about us. Well, now that really does wrap it up for another episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast.
Thanks again for listening, and thank you for making our common room on Facebook such a fun place to spend time. We want all of you to be a part of this conversation, and it does not stop when the episode ends. So you can see the comments, questions, corrections, and more on Facebook at the Prancing Pony Podcast, on Twitter at Prancing Pony Pod, and on Instagram at Prancing Pony Pod.
And a very special thank you to our patrons at the Kierdance contribution tier: DeMay in Alaska, James in Virginia, Tamsin in Minnesota, Emily in Texas, and Chad in Texas. Thank you all very much.
Make sure you don't miss any episodes of the Prancing Pony Podcast. Subscribe to the show through iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app.
And one last thing as always, don't forget to send your thoughts, comments, and most of all, your Tolkien-inspired art. We really love that. To Parliament at theprancingponypodcast.com, and we'll try to get them into our social media channels or our next episode. Well, however long we've had, it is still far too short a time to spend among such excellent and admirable listeners. But until next time.
Farewell, friends.